Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of heartbreak, mystery, and a seemingly endless search for answers. This is the story of the boy in the box, America's oldest unsolved mystery. A tale of abandonment, secrecy, and lost innocence. This case will leave you wondering, who was this boy? Why was he left in such a tragic state? And how could someone carry such a secret for so long? Stay with us as we unravel the haunting and tragic story of the boy in the box. A cardboard box, rain-soaked and crumpled, lies in a remote clearing of a Philadelphia suburb. Inside, the frail body of a young boy, no name, no history, no justice. For over 6 decades, this mystery has baffled investigators, haunted families, and ignited a hunt for answers that remains unresolved to this day. This is more than a cold case, it's a chilling reflection of a life cut short and a story that refuses to fade into obscurity. On a cold February afternoon in 1957, the air around the outskirts of Philadelphia felt heavy, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones. The woods off Susquehanna Road, usually quiet and unremarkable, carried an eerie stillness that day. Among the tangled brush and barren trees, Hunter Grayson, an avid nature enthusiast, an ornithologist and part-time student, moved carefully along a narrow path. A pair of binoculars hung around his neck, a notebook tucked under his arm. His goal was simple: to document bird nests for a local conservation project. As he scanned the area, his attention was drawn to something unusual. Beneath a patch of dry, brittle leaves lay a crumpled cardboard box, its edges softened by recent rains. At first, it seemed like litter, just another forgotten object left to decay in the woods. But its placement, partially concealed and oddly out of place, gnawed at his curiosity. Approaching cautiously, he knelt down to examine it, brushing away the leaves that had gathered on top. What lay inside shattered the tranquility of that cold afternoon. Nestled in the box was the lifeless body of a young boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old. His fragile frame was pale and thin, his ribs faintly visible through his skin. His hair had been recently and unevenly cut, as if done in haste or desperation. His bruised and battered body bore no obvious signs of identification, no clothing tags, no belongings, nothing to hint at who he was or where he had come from. The only accompaniment was a worn, tattered blanket wrapped loosely around him, its faded pattern barely visible. The moment hung suspended in silence. For Hunter, the discovery felt unreal, like a terrible nightmare he couldn't wake from. The air around him seemed to freeze as he realized the gravity of what he had stumbled upon. Not wanting to disturb the scene further, he turned and ran, his heart pounding as he left the woods to notify authorities. The discovery of the boy's body quickly became the talk of the town, spreading through the community like wildfire. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they were confronted with one of the most baffling and heartbreaking cases they had ever encountered. The boy's small frame was carefully removed from the box, examined by investigators who noted every detail in the hope of uncovering clues. The box itself was ordinary, a simple container with markings indicating it had once held a bassinet. It had been sold at a local department store, but with no unique identifiers, tracking its origin became an impossible task. The blanket, while seemingly significant, also provided no leads. It was a mass-produced item, sold across the country in large quantities. The autopsy, conducted shortly after the boy's body was recovered, painted a grim and troubling picture. He had been malnourished, a sign that his short life may have been marked by neglect. His hair, cut close to the scalp in a haphazard manner, raised questions about whether someone had been trying to disguise his appearance or remove evidence. Bruises and other superficial injuries suggested that he had suffered physical abuse, though the exact cause of death remained uncertain. No missing person reports matched the boy's description, and initial attempts to identify him yielded no results. He wasn't a runaway, at least not one anyone was looking for. He wasn't a child taken from a known family, nor did he seem to belong to any of the nearby communities. The lack of identification turned the boy into a ghost, a tragic enigma whose life had slipped through the cracks of society. The press quickly picked up the story. Dubbing the child the boy in the box headlines carried the chilling tale across the region, capturing the public's attention and igniting waves of speculation. Who was this boy? Where had he come from? And most importantly, why had no one come forward to claim him? As the days turned into weeks, the mystery deepened. Police canvassed the area, going door to door in search of anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. Investigators reached out to local hospitals, foster homes, and orphanages, hoping to find someone who might recognize the boy. Yet, despite their tireless efforts, every lead seemed to evaporate as quickly as it appeared. By the end of the initial investigation, one truth had become painfully clear: the boy's identity was a puzzle, and the key to solving it was missing. The image of his small, lifeless body became a haunting symbol of a case that refused to yield answers. As investigators packed up their equipment and left the scene, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on them. Even in death, the boy remained a mystery, a silent victim who seemed to have no history, no name, and no one to mourn him. The woods off Susquehanna Road, once a quiet and unremarkable stretch of land, now carried the weight of an unspeakable tragedy, a reminder of how easily a life can be lost and forgotten. The discovery marked the beginning of a case that would baffle investigators and haunt the public for decades to come. The investigation into the discovery of the boy's body began with urgency, as detectives scrambled to piece together the sparse evidence left behind. The remote woods where he was found offered few clues, but every detail was scrutinized in the hope of unraveling the mystery. The cardboard box and the tattered blanket were both taken in as critical evidence. Every inch of the scene was examined, but the absence of footprints, tire marks, or other physical indicators made it clear that the boy's body had been placed there carefully and deliberately. Whoever was responsible had gone to great lengths to ensure that little could be traced back to them. The boy's autopsy revealed more about his life than his death, offering detectives a heartbreaking glimpse into the struggles he had endured. His body showed signs of severe malnutrition, suggesting he had been deprived of basic care over an extended period. His hair, which had been unevenly cut, raised suspicions that someone had attempted to alter his appearance. Faint bruises on his arms and legs hinted at possible physical abuse, though the precise cause of death remained elusive. Without clear evidence of trauma or poisoning, the coroner was left with more questions than answers. The lack of identification on the boy posed the first major hurdle for investigators. The box he was found in bore a label indicating it had originally held a bassinet sold by a local store. Detectives traced the box back to the retailer, but the sales records revealed nothing useful. Hundreds of similar boxes had been sold, and there was no way to pinpoint the buyer. The blanket, though distinct in its pattern, proved equally unhelpful. It was a common make, sold in stores across the country, leaving investigators without any leads on its origin. Detective Samuel Riker, a seasoned investigator known for his tenacity, became the lead on the case. The sight of the boy's small, fragile body struck a deep chord with him, fueling his determination to find answers. Riker delved into missing persons reports from across the region, looking for any child who matched the boy's age, height, and other physical characteristics. To his dismay, none fit the description. It was as if the boy had appeared out of nowhere. The investigation expanded to include orphanages, foster homes, and hospitals. Every institution within a 100-mile radius was contacted in the hopes of finding someone who recognized the boy. Social workers were questioned. Adoption records were reviewed, and hospital birth registries were combed through. Despite these efforts, no one came forward to claim him. He had no name, no family, and seemingly no ties to the world around him. As days turned into weeks, frustration grew among the investigative team. The lack of leads forced them to consider alternative methods of uncovering the boy's identity. Flyers featuring a composite sketch of the boy's face were distributed widely, accompanied by pleas for information. The public response was overwhelming. with calls flooding the police department. Many claimed to have seen the boy or recognized him, but each tip led to a dead end. Riker began to suspect that the boy's life had been deliberately erased. The meticulous care with which his body had been disposed of, coupled with the absence of any identifying markers, suggested a calculated effort to conceal his identity. This led to speculation that the boy's death might be tied to someone close to him, someone who had both motive and opportunity to keep his existence hidden. A forensic artist was brought in to create a lifelike reconstruction of the boy's face. The image, depicting his soft features and haunting eyes, was broadcast on television and published in newspapers across the country. The public was urged to come forward with any information, no matter how minor it seemed. Yet, despite the widespread exposure, no one stepped up to claim the boy or offer concrete information about his identity. Riker turned to experts for additional insights, enlisting the help of Dr. Evelyn Cross, a child psychologist with extensive experience in cases of abuse and neglect. Cross examined the details of the case and developed a profile of the boy's life. She believed he had likely been raised in isolation, away from schools and community programs, which could explain why no one recognized him. The signs of malnutrition and physical abuse suggested a pattern of neglect, while the circumstances of his death pointed to an environment filled with secrecy and dysfunction. The woods where the boy had been found were another point of focus. The area, though secluded, wasn't completely inaccessible. It was used occasionally by locals and hikers, which raised the possibility that the location had been chosen for its balance of isolation and convenience. Investigators theorized that the person who placed the boy there might have been familiar with the area, possibly someone from the nearby community. A door-to-door canvass was launched, with officers questioning residents and searching for anyone who might have noticed unusual activity in the weeks leading up to the discovery. Once again, the results were disappointing. The longer the case stretched on, the more elusive the answers became. Riker, though seasoned in handling difficult cases, found himself deeply affected by the plight of the unknown boy. The image of the child haunted him, his fragile form a constant reminder of the violence and indifference that had led to his death. It was more than a mystery, it was a tragedy that demanded resolution, not only for the boy but for the justice he deserved. Despite the relentless efforts of law enforcement, the boy remained nameless. The few clues they had, the box, the blanket, the rough haircut, refused to yield any meaningful insights. Each lead ended in disappointment. Each new avenue of investigation led back to the same haunting question: who was he, and why had his life ended this way? As time passed and the investigation stagnated, theories about the boy's identity and the circumstances of his death began to surface. With no conclusive evidence to guide them, investigators and the public alike started piecing together speculative narratives to make sense of the senseless. Each theory, however implausible or incomplete, held a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this time, it would lead to an answer. One of the earliest theories suggested that the boy might have been an orphan, a child who had slipped through the cracks of the system. Perhaps he was abandoned by overwhelmed caregivers, only to be taken in by someone ill-equipped to provide for him. His malnourished state and unkempt appearance seemed to align with this possibility. Investigators scoured orphanages and foster care records, looking for any discrepancies, but the searches yielded nothing. It was as if the boy had never officially existed, his life undocumented and his presence erased. Another possibility pointed to a more sinister scenario. Whispers of an underground adoption network began to circulate, fueling suspicions that the boy might have been trafficked. In this theory, he was purchased under the table, his true origins concealed to protect the identities of those involved. Such arrangements, though rare, were not unheard of during the time. Investigators probed into illegal adoption cases, questioning individuals known to have participated in these networks. While the theory was compelling, it failed to produce any leads linking the boy to such activities. Speculation turned darker with the idea that the boy could have been the victim of familial shame or scandal. Some investigators theorized that he might have been the illegitimate child of a wealthy or prominent family, hidden away to avoid public disgrace. If this were true, it might explain the lengths taken to conceal his identity. Families with secrets often went to great extremes to protect their reputations. This theory, however, proved impossible to confirm without more evidence. Then came the story of Margaret, a woman who came forward years later with a chilling account. She claimed that her abusive mother had purchased the boy as a domestic servant, and that he had suffered brutal treatment in their household. According to Margaret, the boy's death was the result of her mother's violent tendencies, and his body was disposed of to cover up the crime. Investigators initially found her story compelling. It aligned with some of the known details about the boy's condition and the secrecy surrounding his death. However, Margaret's account was riddled with inconsistencies, and follow-up investigations failed to corroborate her claims. Another lead emerged when Harold Simmons, a factory worker, reported seeing a boy who matched the victim's description in the weeks before the body was discovered. Simmons remembered the boy being with a woman who appeared agitated and anxious, as though she were hiding something. Despite the promising nature of this sighting, it, too, failed to provide a breakthrough. Simmons couldn't recall specific details about the woman, and no further sightings of the pair were reported. The boy's age and appearance also led some to wonder whether he might have been a runaway. In the 1950s, it wasn't uncommon for children from troubled homes to leave in search of a better life. Yet, this theory didn't hold up under scrutiny. If he had run away, someone, whether a parent, teacher, or neighbor, should have noticed his absence. The fact that no one had reported him missing strongly suggested that his death was tied to someone who had wanted to keep him hidden. As the years went on, the case attracted amateur sleuths and armchair detectives, each eager to solve the puzzle that had eluded professionals. Some theorized that the boy's appearance had been deliberately altered to make him harder to identify. The rough haircut, the bruises, and the lack of personal items all pointed to an effort to erase his identity. This sparked further speculation about whether the boy had been taken from a different state or even another country, though no evidence supported this idea. Another line of thinking revolved around the box itself. Its markings indicated that it once contained a bassinet, a detail that felt significant to investigators. They speculated that the box might have belonged to a household with a baby, possibly the boy's younger sibling. If so, it raised troubling questions about why the boy had been cast aside. Despite this promising thread, the mass production of the box rendered it nearly impossible to trace. Each theory brought with it a wave of hope and frustration. Every promising lead seemed to end in the same place, a dead end. Investigators began to feel as though they were circling around a truth they couldn't quite reach. They were left with tantalizing fragments, each hinting at a larger story that refused to come into focus. As the theories continued to evolve, one thing became increasingly clear: whoever had been responsible for the boy's death had gone to great lengths to ensure that his identity would remain a mystery. It wasn't just a case of a life cut short, it was a deliberate act of erasure, a refusal to acknowledge his existence. This realization haunted those who worked on the case, driving their determination to uncover the truth. Even as new theories emerged, the central question lingered, unanswered and insistent. Who was the boy, and why had his life ended in such a tragic and lonely way? The more investigators learned, the more elusive the truth became, leaving the mystery of the boy in the box as an enduring enigma that refused to be solved. As the investigation stretched into years, the boy's identity remained elusive, but the dedication to uncovering his story did not waver. The case continued to haunt those who had worked on it, becoming a symbol of unanswered questions and unfinished business. Detective Samuel Riker, who had been at the forefront of the original investigation, refused to let go. Even after retiring from the force, he remained deeply invested in the mystery, spending countless hours reviewing old files and chasing down new leads. The case continued to haunt the public psyche, inspiring amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts. Some attempted their own investigations, often visiting the boy's grave marked with the simple epitaph, "America's unknown child." By the 1980s, advances in forensic science opened new avenues of investigation. The introduction of DNA profiling promised a potential breakthrough. Though the boy's case predated widespread DNA use, his remains had been carefully preserved, allowing for the extraction of genetic material. The hope was that DNA could link him to living relatives, offering the first real chance at identifying him after decades of frustration. The DNA sample was entered into national and international databases, where it was compared against profiles from missing persons, criminal cases, and genealogical records. Months passed as the results were analyzed, but the findings were inconclusive. No direct matches were found, leaving investigators once again at a standstill. Still, the DNA provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. It confirmed that the boy had European ancestry, narrowing the search field slightly. While the forensic efforts were ongoing, new attention was brought to the case through media exposure. True crime documentaries, books, and newspaper articles rekindled public interest in the boy's story. Armchair detectives and internet forums began to dissect the available evidence, sharing theories and insights. Some argued that the case's resolution lay in exploring the family dynamics of the 1950s, a time when societal pressures often forced individuals to keep secrets at all costs. Others suggested that the boy might have been a victim of trafficking or even part of an illegal medical experiment. Among those captivated by the case was Dr. Eleanor West, a forensic anthropologist specializing in cold cases. West had a reputation for reconstructing the lives of unidentified victims through a combination of forensic science and historical research. She offered to create a new facial reconstruction of the boy using advanced techniques that accounted for aging and facial asymmetry. The resulting image, while speculative, gave the boy a presence he hadn't had before, a vivid, lifelike representation of the child who had been so cruelly forgotten. The updated reconstruction was widely shared in the media, sparking a new wave of tips and theories. Some claimed the boy resembled children they had known decades earlier, while others insisted they had seen him in old family photographs. Each tip was investigated thoroughly, but none provided the definitive answer investigators sought. Meanwhile, advancements in isotopic analysis provided another avenue for exploration. By analyzing the chemical composition of the boy's hair and teeth, scientists could determine information about his diet and geographic origins. The analysis revealed that the boy had likely spent most of his life in the northeastern United States, possibly in Pennsylvania or a neighboring state. This finding supported the theory that he had been local to the area where his body was discovered, but it still didn't explain why no one had come forward to claim him. As the forensic findings trickled in, they painted a picture of a life filled with hardship. The isotopic analysis confirmed periods of severe malnutrition, aligning with earlier suspicions of neglect. The presence of certain trace elements suggested that the boy might have lived in an industrial area, possibly near factories or other sources of environmental pollution. These details, while compelling, added more layers to the mystery. If the boy had been part of a community, even one on the fringes, why had no one noticed his disappearance? Investigators revisited earlier theories with fresh eyes, using the new data to refine their hypotheses. The idea that the boy might have been hidden by a family ashamed of his existence gained traction, especially in light of the isotopic evidence. It seemed plausible that he had lived in secrecy, his presence known only to a small circle of people. This theory aligned with the growing understanding of the social dynamics of the 1950s, when appearances and reputations often took precedence over truth and justice. The renewed investigation also prompted a closer examination of the boy's injuries and physical condition. Specialists in child abuse and forensic pathology were brought in to reassess the autopsy findings. They concluded that the boy's injuries were consistent with prolonged physical abuse, possibly inflicted by someone in a position of authority. This conclusion deepened the tragedy of his story, suggesting that his life had been marked not only by neglect but also by violence. Despite the advances in technology and the tireless efforts of investigators, the boy's identity remained just out of reach. Each piece of evidence, no matter how promising, seemed to lead to another question rather than an answer. The cardboard box, the tattered blanket, the uneven haircut, these details formed a mosaic of tragedy, but the full picture remained obscured. The inability to name the boy or uncover the circumstances of his death weighed heavily on those who had worked the case. For Riker, who had dedicated his life to seeking justice for the boy, the lack of resolution was a constant source of frustration and sorrow. He often wondered if the boy's story would ever be told in full, or if he would remain forever shrouded in mystery. As the 21st century approached, the case of the boy in the box continued to captivate and confound. The advances in forensic science, the persistent media attention, and the dedication of countless investigators had brought the boy closer to being identified than ever before. Yet, the truth remained elusive, leaving the world with a haunting reminder of how a single life could slip through the cracks, leaving only questions in its wake. Decades after the boy's discovery, his case remained a cold yet unforgettable mystery. Investigators and journalists had poured their lives into uncovering the truth about the child whose lifeless body was left in a discarded cardboard box. Yet, despite advancements in technology, the unwavering dedication of investigators, and the widespread interest of the public, the boy's identity remained unknown, as elusive as it had been the day he was found. By the early 21st century, forensic technology had advanced dramatically, offering new hope for cases long thought unsolvable. Genetic genealogy, a breakthrough in investigative science, had successfully identified unknown victims and even linked perpetrators to decades-old crimes. The boy's remains were re-examined, and DNA was extracted from the fragile bones that had been preserved since his discovery. This profile was uploaded to genealogical databases in the hope of uncovering distant relatives and, with them, clues to the boy's identity. Initial results seemed promising. Matches appeared, suggesting connections to distant family lines scattered across the country. These small breakthroughs hinted at the possibility of mapping out a family tree. Investigators worked tirelessly, chasing every lead with the determination to bring the boy out of the shadows. However, the path was fraught with dead ends. Some family lines led to individuals long deceased, while others were impossible to trace due to incomplete records or name changes. The hope of identifying close relatives dwindled as investigators realized that every promising clue seemed to slip just out of reach. As geneticists continued their meticulous work, other aspects of the investigation were revisited. Isotopic analysis of the boy's remains suggested that he had spent much of his short life in the northeastern United States, likely near where his body was found. This revelation pointed to a local connection, but it also deepened the mystery. How could a child who likely lived nearby remain unclaimed and unnoticed for so long? Who were the people who had cared for or failed him, and why had they erased his existence so thoroughly? Theories flourished, both among investigators and the growing community of amateur sleuths who had become invested in the case. Some believed the boy had been born into a family plagued by abuse and secrecy, his life kept hidden due to shame or fear. Others speculated that he might have been the victim of a broader crime, such as child trafficking, with those responsible going to great lengths to conceal his identity. The cardboard box and the blanket found with him, once thought to be key pieces of evidence, now felt like mocking remnants of a story that refused to be told. Attempts to reconstruct the boy's face through advanced forensic artistry brought him to life in a way photographs never could. His reconstructed image was widely shared, sparking a flood of tips and theories. Some claimed to recognize the boy from their childhood, while others were convinced he resembled children in old family photographs. Each tip was thoroughly investigated, but none yielded the definitive answer investigators sought. The more the boy's story captured the public imagination, the more frustrating his anonymity became. As years passed, even breakthroughs felt bittersweet. DNA comparisons revealed no close relatives willing to come forward, and many leads remained tantalizingly incomplete. The boy's case became a symbol of persistence in the face of insurmountable odds, but also a stark reminder of how some stories may never fully emerge from the shadows. Each new test, each new theory, seemed only to circle back to the same unanswerable questions: who was this child, and why had he been abandoned in such a cruel and unceremonious way? Despite the lack of resolution, the boy's memory endured. His case became a touchstone for advancements in forensic science and a rallying cry for justice for the forgotten. Detectives who had worked the case in their youth retired without answers, their careers marked by the haunting knowledge that a child had slipped through the cracks of society and time. Public vigils were held on the anniversary of his discovery, with people gathering to honor the life that had been so tragically cut short. In 2019, a breakthrough occurred when a DNA match surfaced. The boy's genetic profile linked him to a distant cousin, leading investigators to a family with roots in Philadelphia. This connection pointed to a woman named Grace Hartley, a reclusive figure who had lived in the area at the time of the boy's death. Grace, who had passed away decades earlier, had a troubled history of mental illness and domestic abuse. Neighbors recalled her as secretive and volatile, often disappearing for weeks at a time. Old family records revealed that Grace had a son who had been institutionalized as a toddler, though no documentation of his fate existed. Further digging uncovered a connection between Grace and the Simmons family, the same family whose patriarch had reported seeing a boy weeks before his discovery. Was the boy a secret child hidden from public view? Had Grace's struggles and societal pressures led to his untimely death? No conclusive evidence was found, and the case cannot be solved. His grave, originally marked only by the words "unknown child," became a site of pilgrimage for those moved by his story. Flowers, toys, and handwritten notes were left by strangers who saw in the boy a symbol of vulnerability and resilience. Over time, a headstone was added, bearing the simple inscription "America's unknown child." It was a recognition of the countless lives he had touched, even in death, and the enduring mystery of his identity. The case remains open, a testament to the determination of those who refuse to let the boy be forgotten. Yet, it also serves as a sobering reminder that some mysteries may never be solved. For every scientific breakthrough or new investigative technique, there are limits, barriers of time, circumstance, and human silence that cannot always be overcome. The boy's story remains unfinished, an echo of the life he might have lived. His anonymity is a haunting reminder of how easily a child can be lost, erased, and discarded. Yet in the face of this erasure, his story has endured, carried forward by those who refuse to forget. The boy in the box remains a symbol of justice deferred and the enduring quest for truth, a mystery that continues to inspire and perplex, with the hope that someday, somehow, the final pieces of the puzzle will fall into place. Until then, the boy's name and his story remains a question that hangs heavy in the air, a whisper from the past that refuses to be silenced. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of America's most haunting mysteries. The story of the boy in the box is a testament to the resilience of those who seek justice and the tragic consequences of secrets left buried. Do you think the truth will ever come to light? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant. This is Mystery Minds, signing off.